For those of you that don't know, my name is Brandy Votava. I am the Director of Operations for Working Partners. And Working Partners, just a little bit about that, it's a consulting firm where we help businesses develop and maintain a drug-free workplace by writing highly customized policies and then offering ongoing support through our consortium. I did want to start this session just by asking if any of you were in our previous sessions, are there any burning questions that you had that maybe you haven't had the chance to ask? No? Okay, all right, so what this session is going to entail, we're going to be working through or progressing through this interactive survey, or so it was supposed to be interactive. Unfortunately, the little link down there is not working, so we'll just work through it together on hard copy. First, let me pivot over here just a second so that I can have control of this. Just going to be sitting off to the side here. Okay. So the first question that we were going to look at here is, have you reviewed and or updated your alcohol or drug-free policy within the last 5 years? And then Karen, would you mind speaking into, the importance of having an up-to-date policy?
Yeah, does anybody have a thought about your answer first? Thoughts about your answers? Yes, no, maybe, I don't know.
Like, say the answer? I don't have a policy.
Okay, that was gonna be my next question, don't have a policy. How many of you have a policy that's maybe tucked into, it's hard to sit, I don't feel like I can see you. How many of you have a policy that's tucked into your HR manual? Maybe it's something that says, don't do drugs, or this is gonna happen? Yeah, tucked in, less than a page? Yeah, the page is not like a magic number or anything. It just is a little bit of a flag to say, your policy should be big enough that it's got a lot of details, not just about the rules, but about operationally, what do you do about those? I would say now more than ever, if you don't have a policy or it hasn't been reviewed or looked at in the past couple of years, we've had medical marijuana for 7 years, that now's the time to do that. And it's one of those policies that should be updated frequently because things change so quickly, particularly right now about marijuana. So I would go back to your offices. Remember I said, make sure you've got under the influence defined. You talk about CBD, you talk about medical marijuana, etc. I hope you never have to have it, but if you do, you'll be glad.
Yeah.
I do have one question.
Yeah.
Okay. I forget, somebody had mentioned it earlier today, but we had said, or it was mentioned that it's okay to mention under the influence as a positive test.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that can be across the board as pre-employment random reasonable suspicion?
Everything.
Okay.
What's the definition of being under the influence? When your policy says you can't be under the influence, what does that mean? You have to be slurring and staggering? No. The definition, you can only tell one way, testing. Positive test equals under the influence, done. And then when somebody says, yeah, but I used a week ago, or yeah, but I did, but yeah, but I this, the definition is a positive test. That means you're under the influence. It keeps it very objective, which is important, particularly in these days of marijuana. I wish it measured impairment. I wish we could, but we can't. So that's what we have to lean in on.
Any other questions? All right, we can go over to the next question here. We have, if an employee needs help with an alcohol or drug problem, does your organization have a professional person or resource identified to send them to? Any thoughts on that one or answers? How many of you would have answered that no, or did answer that no? No.
I'm curious whether or not you have access to an employee assistance program, an EAP. You shaking your head? Can you tell me more about that?
I just know we have it.
Okay,
I don't.
that's okay. What else? Anybody else have one? Yeah, tell us about yours, Sean.
Ours is
Shane.
the largest of the consortium. So we have a company. It's completely confidential for our employees. The one thing that is nice about it is we can do mandatory referrals after a positive test or violation. But also their families can use it. They can use it. And if it's used for something that doesn't necessarily have to do with the mandatory referral. It's really nice that we're never going to know, but it's still a resource for them.
An EAP, Employee Assistance Program, is an organization that helps employees with personal problems so you don't have to. So like Katie said, it can be drug and alcohol, it can be divorce, it can be financial, it can be anything. And that way, because it gets in the way of productivity. So that way, if they can go on their own, or if you have to do a mandatory referral, like Shane mentioned, you can do that. Check with if you use a payroll company, your health insurance, sometimes they throw in an EAP for free. Check it out and ask. And it's one of those things where it also doesn't have to be expensive. If you don't offer health insurance to your people, sometimes you can get an EAP that's really inexpensive, so you have some kind of benefit, particularly if you're a small company. You could probably get an EAP for $20, $22 a head per year, and that gets that person and everybody who lives in their home counseling, education. It is a great service for any personal problem that could get in the way of them being able to do their jobs. An EAP. So check it out, because you might already have one and don't know about it. And if you do have one and don't know what it does, dig it up, call them, get brochures, because you want your people to use it. How's your utilization? Do you know?
I'm going to say that for voluntary, we don't know, and I'm okay with that.
Yes.
But for mandatory, they've been great to work with and get, I'm able to get a clear answer of this person is okay to come back to work, or this person's not okay to come back to work, and I don't need to know anything else.
Great.
Yeah.
So you double that with a return to duty test, and then you can feel comfortable bringing somebody back who originally tested positive, right?
Yeah.
It's a whale of a service. If you don't have one, check it out. You may have one, you don't even know about it.
Any questions? Okay, thank you, Karen. Moving on to the next question. Have your employees signed a written statement outlining your stance or expectations regarding medical marijuana and CBD? You have a second there?
Yeah, there you go. I can't tell. I have the first couple questions, then I'm going to be done. So it's not always going to be me. I should be freaking out. The worst thing is if you find a candidate for a job that you've been looking for, and you find this perfect person and you're ready to hire them, and you do pre-employment testing, or maybe you don't, and they say, oh, by the way, I have a card, just thought you ought to know. It's like, oh, crud. If you haven't thought about it ahead of time, whether you're going to accommodate, whether you're not going to accommodate medical marijuana, you really want to know and communicate that so you don't get thrown off base. And it takes a little bit of time, because you kind of have to rally your troops to decide, where do we stand on this? What do we want to do? Do we want to accommodate? Do we not want to? How do we feel about this? So it's important now.
All right, moving along here to the next question. It says, does your organization currently do drug testing other than pre-employment?
Will you do a show of hands literally for this one?
Yeah.
You do testing something more than pre-employment. How many of you do pre-employment testing? Okay, yeah. I'm curious about why you do it, why wouldn't you do it? What are the pros and cons? Shane, I'm gonna pick on you just because I know you and I know your policy. Why would you choose to do pre-employment?
Just get a starting benchmark to see where we are.
Is it required to do pre-employment from some drug-free workplace standpoints?
It's all about authorities. Like, who is your authority? Does the Bureau of Workers' Comp require it? No. Does OSHA require it? No. Are there other laws in Ohio? Couple. If you do construction projects for the state of
That's what I was
Ohio,
thinking, yeah.
you have to do
You
it.
have to do for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. How about reasons not to do it? Where you go, we thought about it, not into it. Either way is fine, by the way. I don't care. What about reasons for not doing it? Anything?
For not doing the drug test?
For not doing a pre-employment, you go, we don't really want to
The expense,
The expense, a barrier to hiring maybe?
I was gonna say,
I
it's
don't wanna
hard it's hard to find employees and.
Yeah. If I could say one thing, if you have two buckets, one bucket is testing that you do proactively where you're looking for it. I'm looking for it. Pre-employment, random, I'm looking for it. That's one type of testing. Another bucket is reactive. I'm only gonna do if something happens. Post-accident, reasonable suspicion. I would really encourage you to, at minimum, do the reactive testing. If something happens, you've got that tool if you have a suspicion. And also be sure that if you're going to do any testing whatsoever, that you have a policy. Because you really want to be able to show that you gave fair notice to people that you were going to do a test.
Moving along here. Does your organization have set procedures? Oh wait, this is out of
That was
order.
right. I submitted that one. Katie could speak to that also, but I submitted that one.
Okay. Does your organization have set procedures for supervisors and managers to follow when an employee may be misusing alcohol and or other drugs?
I would go ahead and just put policy, I feel like.
I do. Anybody?
What kind of answers are we seeing?
Yeah. That's one of those things where you may never need them. A lot of companies never need those procedures. But it's something like, oh, I think I smell marijuana on somebody. Oh, I think I smell alcohol on somebody. Oh, I got a tip. You know, I sent a crew over to work on somebody's house and the homeowner said, here, pitching beer cans in our garage or whatever. I don't make these stories up. You really do want to have procedures in place so that the supervisors know what to do. Sometimes companies will give supervisors a lot of responsibility. They're going to notice it, they're going to document, they're going to confront, they're going to decide whether to test. Most companies, because that's a lot to ask a supervisor to do, say to the supervisor, you're the eyes and ears. All you have to do is raise the flag. Talk to me, and then together we'll handle it. Oftentimes supervisors don't want to do it, so we need to really have something in the policy that says this is what the expectations are if you notice something. You have to take the whole burden, but if you don't raise the flag, then it sits with you. As soon as you bring me in it, then you can release. And you know, you want to have forms. Katie talked about a reasonable suspicion checklist and those kinds of things that just make it, I don't want to say easier, but more purposeful to know how to handle these things. Shane, do you have a comment about that? Any kind of?
I think us using the reasonable suspicion checklist has been a ginormous hit for our supervisors. They love it. I mean, they don't love it. But I really like the culture that we've built to where the supervisors, they all have my cell phone number, and multiple times they're like, I need to talk to you. Here's what I'm saying. Can I get a reasonable suspicion checklist form? What do we need to do? And just having that documentation and being able to sit down with the employee and say, hey, you're not in trouble, but let's go through this checklist about that's maybe you've been reported or what's been noticed from a few people. So what we're going to do, this is not a discipline, this is not a corrective action, this is a method to make sure that you're going to go home safe with your family tonight.
Was your culture always like that, that your supervisors were willing to do that?
I want to say willing, yes, but having the resources, no.
I mean, would your supervisors be willing, or do you think your supervisors would be willing to pick up the phone and do something if they notice something?
I think it depends on how severe and what is it endangering them or somebody else? Like,
Yeah.
Are they running a piece of equipment? Okay, yeah, safety. I mean, it's always kind of a safety issue.
Yeah, and sometimes it's an issue of getting the job done. If I say something about her and they pull her off my crew, we're not going to be able to meet our deadline.
Right.
And that's a bummer too. I think supervisors more often than not aren't willing to do anything.
Yeah, and I do want to say, I think with us it's a little bit different since we are a nonprofit and our projects aren't making any money. Our projects don't necessarily have these deadlines. So I think that's kind of a big help with our supervisors and willing to come forward. Because our goal is to get people out the door into other jobs in the community. So,
Your
yeah,
objectives are a little different.
right.
Anybody else have a comment on that about management and their role in this issue?
Okay, all right. Try to get out of the way there. So the next one we have here is your drug testing system and process legally defensible? How many of you do have a drug-free workplace policy? I think it was just the two, right? No, just Shane, okay.
But more than that, more of you test though, right? Some of you test without policy.
Got it, okay. All right. Karen, anything you want to add into that? before we
This
go
is
to
my
the
last
next one?
question, by the way, and then I'm drinking coffee. It kind of a trick question, because I would expect people to go, well, what's defensible? You know, what's legal? What can I do? Ohio, first of all, it's a very liberal state as far as what you can do, employers. There are some states where you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this. We can do hair testing, we can do oral fluid, we can do whatever testing you want. The gold shelf testing is, you want to test like the Department of Transportation tests, truck drivers, airline pilots, because they kind of set the standard. So if they say urine's cool to test for drugs, that's what I'm gonna do. If they say that you should use breath for alcohol, that's what I'm gonna do. Because it's most defensible. If you had somebody who kicked and screamed, it's the most defensible, and it's the most fair to your employees. Because if you go to a drugstore and get one of those quick tests, you get a quick test for drugs, it's just not as reliable. And it's not fair to the employee either. So I think one of the key elements, and this is the last thing I'll say, in a legally defensible, whatever that question was, is that you have a doctor in the process called a medical review officer. And if the person goes to the collection facility, they give their sample, it goes to the lab, and they find something that looks like a drug, and they confirm that yes, indeed, it's weed or amphetamines or whatever, before you find out about it, the employee gets a call, a private call at home, you don't know anything, and that doctor says, hey, is there a medical reason this is in your system? And the employee goes, yeah, I got a script for Valium or Oxycontin or whatever, and if the employee can prove that, then the result comes back negative.
Well, and there's a legal chain of command with the sample too.
Exactly.
If you're getting one from a drugstore, then.
That's
well,
right.
I don't know what they did or whose urine they tested, but it wasn't
That's
mine.
right.
So-
And they check it for temperature and adulterants and all, but it's just like, but if you want to know, like, well, how do I test? Test like DOT tests. If you go to a lab and say, I want to start testing, what do you want to do? I want to test like DOT tests. You're going to be in pretty good steads.
Good deal.
Ask Katie a question.
Okay, I promise. Next. Any questions on that before I go on to the next one? Okay, does your organization have set procedures for
We did that.
supervisors? Oh gosh, I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. Karen, you again, no, I'm kidding.
No.
What assumptions are your employees making about their rights with marijuana legalization?
So during the second session, I brought up a couple of them, but I'm curious to hear, is there any chatter so far on what they can and can't do or think they can and can't do, especially with the potential legalization of adult use coming on? Anybody hearing anything?
I think most of them are kind of thinking it's gonna be the same as alcohol.
Okay.
You can't smoke a joint.
I can't do it at work, but it's my time, I can do whatever I want, sort of thing. Right, I hear that it's legal, so so I can do what I want to do. Another assumption is the company's going to stop testing for it. Or the other one is, especially when you talk about medical, if I get a card for it, then then I can absolutely, for sure, that's my ticket, right, to be able to do things. So couple of key points. One, Karen mentioned this during her first session, was about the differentiation between prescription and card or recommendation. It sounds like semantics, but it's really a lot more than that. Remember, with a prescription, it's gone through FDA. You get that package of information from the pharmacy that tells you dosage and interactions and all those kinds of things. That doesn't come with marijuana for medical use. None of those pieces exist. It's not a prescription. So that's a helpful point. But when it comes to the assumptions, is getting out in front of them and saying, I know you might be thinking that this could happen, and making sure that your organization has been clear about your stance. You've had those discussions ahead of time so that you can stand confidently in front of your staff and say, yes, this is what exists, but here's how it's happening here, and this is why. We're under these authorities, this is what our policy says, those types of things, just to be able to get ahead of it. But this question was to get you thinking of, what are my employees thinking? And do I know what they're thinking? Am I making assumptions about their assumptions? So my caution to you, or my encouragement to you, is whether you think they're thinking things or not, get in front of them and just get ahead of it.
What's the closest medical marijuana dispensary to here?
Michigan.
Really?
Well,
You're talking about, you're.
medical dispensary,
Medical,
like,
okay.
where's the closest one to this county? Is there one in the county?
There's
There's definitely one in Coshocton.
Lincoln County.
There's one in Tuscarawas.
There's a bajillion in Columbus.
There's gotta be one in Richland County.
I think there is one in Richmond. There's
I
a,
think just putting it out there.
there's not one in this county?
Not sure.
There's one in
And
Tuscarawas.
Wayne County? Tuscarawas,
Tuscarawas.
definitely, Coshocton County, yes. The reason I'm asking is that those places will probably be the first places that will expand their business to sell general adult use marijuana. Just so you know. And it's a whale of a business, don't be surprised, though, you know. Municipalities can vote to keep it out, but, no, but it's a business, it'll come.
I have 3 within a mile and a half of my house.
Where are you, where do you live?
Newark, Lincoln County.
Okay.
Wow.
That's so, what do you call that? Condensed, right? For me, it's a lot. And they're, like I said, they're the ones that will open another part of their business probably to sell to the general public. Do you live, is your business in Newark?
Yeah, I'm part of Aquas.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay. Didn't know that. You don't have a little t-shirt on.
Okay. Make sure I'm on the right one here. How often are you checking your team's knowledge on the organization's drug-free workplace program expectations?
So anybody doing annual training or annual employee education already, just by a show of hands? Anybody doing it just kind of as things come up or on an as-needed basis? How about regular toolbox talks? Anybody doing those? So drug-free safety program in Ohio has a requirement for annual for employee education. And if you're not under that authority or another one, you essentially get to choose what you want to do, right? We would encourage you to do it at minimum annually to have that conversation. And again, it comes back to that routine getting in front of people. And I do add in here, like checking their knowledge, like an actual policy review. Part of our training is to do a policy review, and if it's, if we already know the policy, for instance, if it's a working partners policy, we actually make it an interactive. It's called a participant-centered learning, which is very beneficial for adult learners to actually take in the information. But it's more than just like, oh, here's 6 bullet points of what we do, and then, oh, here's a reminder of this thing, and I'm just talking at you. It's actually, true and false questions, Jeopardy. We have a toss across game. It's something that is engaging. If you can throw in a competition or something, that's even more fun. Even if it's for like dumb things like candy, people get excited. But it's something to get them actually calling out answers. And what we've seen over the years is more and more people remember things, or they're checking their policy before the session comes out because they want to win the competition the next day. Again, even if it's for bogus things like first one to get lunch. But the idea is, if you're lucky enough to not have any issues, then the likelihood of coming across this program is pretty slim. You know, when everything's working well, it doesn't come up that you have these interactions, and that's a great thing, but it still doesn't mean we don't need to stay in front of people about it. Especially when you think of, like, maybe during the session, and we're talking about prescription medication, and I don't take prescription medication, so I just kind of tune out during that time. And I've kind of forgotten what all that means until I start taking my, I get prescribed something, or maybe I'm taking an allergy medication in the spring. So having the regular reminders of pieces of your policy throughout the year can be beneficial as well.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. Are you meeting best practice standards, annual, relevant, engaging, for employee education and supervisor training?
So we just talked a little bit about the employee. Do you guys do anything different for supervisors? You know, sometimes they get a little more attention than employees. And
The previous company I worked for, I just started with the company I'm at, so I don't know what their policies are. But the previous one, when they did their annual training for employees for the drug-free workplace, then they would have an extension that the
Yep.
supervisors would stay another half hour, or whatever for training.
Good. And I've seen too that some companies might opt to spend time with the supervisors but not the employees, or vice versa. So I would highly encourage that, even if you're not under an authority, spend that time talking about the policies and procedures and the roles, because that kind of goes back to Karen's question on, does your organization have the set procedures? Well, if you do, you want your management team to know what to do with them, right? I think that it's not reasonable to think that just because you hand out a policy or a program that people automatically know what to do with it, right? You have to run the scenarios and actually walk through what those steps look like. And by doing it on an annual basis, keeping it relevant, right? What's an important topic that's been going on, what we've been talking about recently, run those types of scenarios, you can definitely get more buy-in from your supervisory team. And that's what you need, right?
Sorry.
That's okay.
So I'm just keeping an eye on the time here to make sure we're good. We have until about 1:30 and it's 1:20 now.
Okay.
So I'm not confident that we're gonna get through the entire questionnaire here, but I did.
I'll move faster.
Yeah. To say, I definitely want to give Renee the chance, to cover some of her questions that she had.
I don't know, Karen had 8 questions.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go on to the next one here. How confident are you in your management team's ability to handle substance-related situations consistently and successfully?
Oh, I'd really like to hear the answer to this one.
Yeah.
Are we, any not confidence? Okay, how about slightly confident? Maybe they could, I'm not really sure. Mostly confident? Our team could handle it? So everybody else is confident? Okay, nobody else wants to raise their hand, I got it. Should have picked up on that one back when you said you were confident. I think this is really tough. If you thought about that, you're like, oh God, no, I hope it doesn't go to so-and-so, or I hope they're not the one who gets that question. I think it's just the reiteration of how important it is to have that time set aside to run those scenarios with them.
All right, thank you. Where do you prioritize substance use prevention in your safety culture?
And I chose this one because I really wanted you to think about, we often think of drug-free workplace as this total separate thing, but it really is just a spoke in your wheel of safety. You wouldn't put somebody on a roof without fall protection. You wouldn't send them into a contaminated area without a respirator. You really shouldn't be on the job without making sure that they don't have substances in their system. You wouldn't put them on scaffolding without proper training, right? And that's the idea, is we would want to put people in these positions without ensuring their safety first. And when it comes to substance-related things, it's not only that individual's safety, it's the organization, it's the public, it's just ripple effect, right? So the more we think of it as this is just one more element of safety, whatever we do for these other categories, we do for drug-free, then it just becomes part of your culture altogether. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, does your organization currently have an employee handbook? If so, is it updated annually?
Great
Renee?
question.
Yeah.
I think that's a great question. So, how many have employee handbooks at your organizations? Great, and are they updated annually? Okay.
Theoretically.
So, yes, so great question. One of the things that we always talk with clients about, first of all, a question that I get a lot is, do we need an employee handbook if we only have 2 or 3 employees? What do you think the answer is to that? Yes, you should. For any organization, your employee handbook is your communication tool with your employees. It ensures your consistency in how you administer policies and procedures. You can also have that customized to your organization, but there are also federal and state mandated policies that need to be in that handbook. And the drug-free workplace and safety policies can also be mentioned in the handbook and maybe have a separate addendum where they're actually housed outside of the handbook. But we always say that the employee handbook, I call it Exhibit A. If there's ever a lawsuit, anything that happens, the lawyers are going to say, what does your employee handbook say? And if you say we don't have one, it's not going to help you any. But also too, I talked with a company a couple weeks ago and they said, well, we have an employee handbook. And I said, well, when has it been updated? And they said, back in 1985. So, there's a lot of changes, a lot of compliance, and we just, really challenge your organization to look at that annually because there are federal things that might change, but it's also a best practice as well.
Any questions? Okay. Move along here. Do you have an I-9 form on file for all employed workers per Department of Immigration regulation?
Does everyone know what an I-9 form is?
I don't personally.
Okay, so this is a form that is required by the Department of Immigration for every employer. Every employee that you have needs to have this on file. This form basically states that they are legally authorized to work in the United States. There's documentation that they need to provide as the employee to verify that, and the employer has that right or that obligation to have those filed and ensure that they're completed within 3 days of hire, to ensure that they're filed as active and terminated. There's a retention schedule for the I-9s. There is a huge increase nationally, but especially in this area and throughout Ohio, of Department of Immigration audits. They're coming in and looking to see, number 1, do you have them? Number 2, are they filled out correctly? And number 3, what does the documentation look like? So there are huge fines associated with this as well. So this is something that we go around and help clients with, of actually doing an audit to see that you have these done correctly. So very important, and it will continue to be even more important as we move through the next few years.
Did you say especially in Ohio they're doing more compliance checking?
Yes.
Wow.
They have been in the Tuscarawas County, Millersburg, Wayne, Holmes.
I was gonna say Holmes County.
Yep, Holmes County for sure. And traditionally too, I'm HR, so I have to scare you at some point. If you have any form of audit, I-9 from the Department of Immigration, Department of Labor, you can guarantee you're gonna have 2 to 3 more audits from another entity within the government within 90 days. So OSHA, they all go hand in hand. And what they look at, and I have an auditor that's a friend as well, they look at the state and they look at the interstate access. So they can say, okay, I'm gonna get off State Route 39 in Dover, and I'm gonna be able to hit 15 businesses in this area, 20 over here. So they are in the area, and I really cannot stress enough the importance of having your things documented correctly. So, and if you have any questions as it relates to that, please give me a call. Happy to answer them.
Good. It's interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. Okay. Does your organization have updated job descriptions for all roles within your organization?
We touched on this a little earlier and mentioned the importance of having job descriptions as it relates to, you know, those safety specific roles. But also from a compliance perspective, the job description is really that snapshot of what your employees are doing. There is also the requirement from a section of having the physical requirements of what that job entails. If there is ever any type of ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, they will look at, you need to have that job description defined, so those duties are clearly outlined as to what those essential functions are. And also part of the job descriptions as well help from a hiring perspective. Whenever organizations say, I need to hire somebody, well, usually they'll take the job description, cut, paste it, post it, and if it's not accurate and not really reflective of what those current duties are, you could be hiring someone that doesn't have the skills that you need. So those go hand in hand as well from a best practice standpoint. Okay.
Okay. Oh, I apologize. Do you have a documented recruitment process?
So this is a question that we always ask as well. Your organizations have processes for hiring, correct?
Yeah.
Do you have one person that completes your interviews, or do you have a number of people within your organization that might do a second or third interview? Just curious as a group. Does HR do your interviews?
Ours is kind of a combination, depending on what the position is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's common. One of the things that we look at from a standardization process, and this will help as well, from a consistency in your procedures, is looking at having a structure of what questions are being asked, what questions should they be asking, and what questions should they not be asking. Believe it or not, there are companies now that I hear some of the questions that they ask, and there is true violation of what they should not be doing. So having that process in place and documented to say, here's how we interview, here's the process, here's how our supervisors or other interviewers are trained, here's how we advertise, here's how we recruit. This helps you in the event that there's ever any type of claim or alleged issue with how you're hiring. It helps you to have that process standardized. And again, there's always variances with some of those, but having that consistency that way, especially if you have multiple locations or multiple people doing the interviews, you know that there's consistency in what's being asked.
And then can that documentation be subpoenaed? Like if I'm taking notes during an interview, do I have to be really careful about what I put in the notes?
Yes, that's a great question. That's a really good question. So a lot of people will take notes, when you're interviewing. Keep in mind, everything that you write down could be part of that. So, you don't want to put female under 35 at the top of the resume, or anything that is going to really be something that could come back to concern you. Now, those are part of what that recruiting process is. So by having that standard questionnaire, you can tell your staff that's interviewing, thank you for helping us. Please be sure you just ask these questions and document the answers on this form versus on the application or on the resume. That's a best practice that we see a lot.
We use a rubric for a lot of our OJC employees.
Okay.
So we have a section of skills, abilities, knowledge, and our managers and our HR team are first in
Perfect.
who was the best sport.
And thank you for sharing that. And some organizations might have an HRIS system where they have an applicant tracking system where people, actually apply online. And you can even still standardize that recruitment process and those questions by uploading that document into those files as well. You'll find a common theme in HR is consistency in how you do things. And again, that's where that handbook comes in play. The job description, anything you can document from a process perspective, the I-9, anything from an employment perspective, is looked at. Another big part that we're seeing a lot of questions on is how employees are classified from either salary or exempt, non-exempt. So this is another big area that a lot of compliance concerns. So also look at how your job descriptions have that person classified and ensure that that process is done correctly.
Wow, I learned a lot from that, by the way, just that one question.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
Would your organization be interested in a complimentary HR consultation to benchmark your existing HR practices and identify areas of risk? Renee?
And this is something that we offer free. It is, I always say, you don't know where you need to be in HR if you don't know where you are. So we come in, it's usually an hour of time where we look at all the different buckets of HR, from recruitment to, evaluation, safety, workplace posters, etc. We then document where you are. We identify any potential areas of risk for you and help to determine, are there resources that can help you? But it also just gives you a framework to know as an organization, here's some of our risk, here's some of our items we can take care of now, and then here's some things we can look at for continued growth and development as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Are there any general questions? We're a little behind here, running about 2 minutes behind. Are there any general questions that anyone wanted to ask?
Just for your consulting, is that just for Ohio employers?
No, it's for,
That's a good question. Good question.
thank you for that question.
Yeah. Okay, all right, well, that about wraps it up here. I do have a final question here that I'll display, but basically it's just saying if you have any further questions, you can feel free to scratch down your information on the pages that I can hand it out to you, and you can leave those with me, or you can just drop off your business card at our table downstairs. But I thank you all for sticking with us and coming through, and I still hope that you're enjoying GAPCON, and I think we have another speaker that's going on right now that we can go and enjoy.